There's also a real big trust built with the person that you're communicating with if they're able to see someone who speaks their language, someone who understands their culture online while they're having another conversation.
We're seeing quite a major slowdown with the stock market, all of that. So let's see how that kind of transitions into results by LSPs in Q2 and beyond.
If you're Canadian, you have the right to receive federal services in both languages, regardless of whether you're monolingual in English or French or bilingual.
And welcome everyone to another episode of Slater Pod today with our very own senior research analyst, Anna Wyndham. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Florian. Hi, listeners.
Hey there. So today we've got a great show for you today with Kirsten Breck Baker, the CEO and co-founder of Jeenie, Jeenie, the on-demand healthcare interpreting platform, who recently raised a Series A round worth a cool $9 million US. So that was a great conversation. We already recorded it the day before. And so the agenda today, we're talking about multilingual airports in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll talk about top hand buying Translate Media in London. We talk about something that you know a lot about, Aussie court interpreting.
Interesting topic.
Interesting topic. And briefly head over to Amazon and their no-code transcription solution. But first, we got to tell you that we have a new website. So listeners, become readers. Please head over to our new website. Really excited to launch the new Slater.com. I think it's been about a week.
Yeah, week and a half.
Week and a half. Feels a lot longer. Feels like we've been doing this website project for like a year or so. Mostly true. So really excited to launch a new website, kind of new style, new flow. It's a lot easier to find your way to our data products, to our research offering. We really simplified that data and research offering into now 4 distinct subscriptions, and they are called Starter, Growth, Pro, and Enterprise. So there's a lot of stuff you get. So I'm not going to go through the full list of features here, but with, the starter, you get all the gated content. You get like a daily industry intelligence email. With growth, we're adding like the RFP center where, you get like 1 or 2 daily RFPs for translation and interpreting work. We've got an investor database, you get the annual market report. And then with the Pro account, you get like literally every research report we've written over the past 2 years. You get invited to all of the briefings, and then all of the gated content as well. And then Enterprise is like you get everything we ever done and will ever do. So, if you want to benefit from the full Slater sweep of data products and research, go and subscribe to the Enterprise. We, of course, also kind of the daily news coverage remains unchanged. If anything, we've probably stepped up the cadence now since we've launched to like 2 or 3 pieces a day of news. So that's great. That's mostly free still, right? So I think it's probably about 90% that's still free. And then to close, we also highlight our kind of advisor practice. We help a lot we help LSPs and investors with like M&A services, commercial due diligence, brokerage services. So anyway, proud to launch the new website. And it's hard to do a segue from a website to a Canadian airport. So let me just pass this over to you. What's happening in Canada and why are people angry at airports?
Yeah, diving into Canada. We reported on 2 airports, one in Alberta and the other in Newfoundland and Labrador. And they were ordered to pay around 20,000 Canadian dollars in damages and costs because the content of their websites and social media was provided in English, but it was not fully provided in French. And in some cases, their social media feeds, their Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook were entirely in English. So, of course, Canada being a bilingual country, 2 official languages, English and French, under the Official Languages Act, all federal institutions have to actively provide services in both languages. Or looking at it the other way around, if you're Canadian, you have the right to receive federal services in both languages, regardless of whether you're monolingual in English or French or bilingual. So that extends to all signage at airports, to actively greeting people in both languages. And this ruling clarifies it also extends to online content.
See, that was my segue. I totally blew this. I mean, we went from our website to the online content. So there we go. But those were just 2. I mean, just two airports, right? It's not like the Toronto airport or some of the big ones, right? So it's those smaller ones.
They're smaller ones, but they're international, and that's why they fall under the regulation. So it's just for federal stuff. If it's provincial, the regulations don't apply. So yeah, in the story, we took a bit of a close-up look at the reactions of Canadians, because this ruling caused quite a bit of agitation, interest, and debate in the comments section under different news articles. And what drew the most attention is that the complainant, his name is Michel Thibodeau, he'd actually lodged hundreds of similar complaints in the last couple of decades for language rights violations, and he'd been awarded damages like multiple times. And the other interesting thing is that he'd never actually visited the two airports that he was complaining about, and he had no intention to do so or to fly. He'd done all of his research online. So yeah, in the reactions, some commentators were saying he's a serial complainant, he's taking advantage of these language laws, he's looking for small violations as a way to make money. But on the other hand, there were lots of people as well saying, very happy to see the law being applied. We're a bilingual country. This is really important. Though we should point out the judge was extremely clear in the ruling that, in his view, the complainant was genuinely motivated by a desire to defend language rights and make sure that, French speakers receive services in French. So that Official Languages Act is being reviewed at the moment in Canadian Parliament. They're trying to modernise it, give federal institutions better guidance, and make sure that that linguistic duality is preserved, continues to grow. And of course, those regulations are a major driver of translation demand in Canada. So always important to keep an eye on them.
The comment section, what would you say? Was it like 50-50 people agreeing and 50 like people disagreeing, or what was the split?
I'd say 50% were really homing in on this particular person and saying, look at this guy, he's been complaining, he's made so much money. And then maybe 40% saying, no, these laws are really important. And maybe another 10% just kind of throwing their hands up and saying, this is so complicated to dictate language use, and it's becoming too hard. So some people were just getting a bit fed up with the whole situation.
I mean, as a Swiss, it's a topic that's obviously dear to well, I mean, me personally, right? I mean, there's a small language here called Romansh. I've spoken about it in the past a bit, and I don't think it would be as vibrant currently as it is without some like regulation and people actually kind of mandating the use in schools, etc. So I mean, there's some merit to it, but it does feel a little trolly if you like just kind of serial litigate there in Canada. Anyway, so I guess more regulation in that sense is good for the translation and localization industry in Canada. So, not a bad demand driver there. Moving to the private sector to London, where Top End Digital Language acquired Translate Media. Translate Media, quite a well-known name. They've been around for a while, London-based. We only have figures for 2018, 2019 in terms of revenue. It was roughly it was like $7 million, pounds in 2018 in terms of revenue, and 8.3 in 2019. So probably like a $10-12 million LSP based in London. The deal closed like end of April. We spoke to Christoph Giuani, president of Top End Digital Language, who used to be with Donnelly, then was with SDL, and now is the president of Top End Digital Language. Remember, Top End is a giant Japanese printing company. That's the parent company. They have a Singapore-based company called Top End Lifang, and they now are very aggressively getting into the language services industry, right? By hiring that team around Christoph, and now they acquired, what's the company they acquired? It was
Global Lexicon.
That's right, Global Lexicon last year, and now they're adding to that. And Global Lexicon already was present in London, and now they're acquiring Translate Media. So they've kind of instantly become quite a sizable player on the UK London market. Congrats to that. And in terms of the client mix, so they said that Translate Media, there's almost no significant client overlap between the two companies. So that's nice expansion. They said the Translate Media, like financial, legal, life sciences, take up about 10% of revenue, e-commerce, retail about 50%, and travel and tech about 10%. And so kind of a nice expansion into e-commerce and retail. With Global Lexicon, I think they're like laser focused on market research, localization, healthcare, and also life sciences. So quite a diversified group there already. and business seems to be going well. They said, Christoph said that for top end, business grew about 20% in 2021, and Q1 has started strongly. I'm really curious how Q2 is going to be for a lot of the companies, because obviously now we're seeing quite a major slowdown with the stock market down and all of that. So let's see how that kind of transitions into or translates, irony of ironies, into results by LSPs in Q2 and beyond. So congrats to Top End, another deal. There's probably going to be a lot more, given that they have such a strong parent company. So they're out there buying. Anna, what's going on in Australia with court interpreting?
Yeah, court interpreting. So in January, the Australian Judicial Council on Cultural Diversity launched the second edition of its national standards for legal interpreting. So these have been described by the Justice Melissa Perry, who chaired the subcommittee, as the first comprehensive set of standards of their kind in this field. So what they do is they provide guidance to courts on how to engage and work with interpreters in an effective way. And of course, the overarching purpose is to ensure that legal assistance is provided to anyone who's going through the courts or involved in courts and tribunals who needs it. And it's not uncommon for that to occur in Australia. 300 languages are spoken in Australian households, 1 in 4 Australians born overseas.
1 in 4.
Yeah, 1 in 4 Australians born overseas. I think that stats from 2016 from the most recent census. So that I don't know if that's changed since then. So it's extremely diverse country in terms of languages. Just out of interest, the main non-English languages are Mandarin, Arabic, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Greek, and Italian, and then there are numerous indigenous languages as well. So the goal of the standards is to make sure that there's procedural fairness for people with limited English proficiency. It covers things like how to actually work out and if an interpreter is needed. So if you work at a court, if you're a lawyer, how do you actually assess if someone in this situation around you needs an interpreter, and what kind of questions or conversations you can have with that person to make that assessment. And then how to identify and engage a qualified interpreter. Australia, of course, has a national accreditation system for interpreters called NAATI. And lots of other recommendations that cover courts and tribunals, judicial officers, legal practitioners, as well as recommendations for the interpreters themselves. So when they were launching the standards, they kind of, Melissa Perry emphasized that there's a lot of practical information here, as well as academic style content. And the latest edition makes changes such as emphasizing that the interpreter needs to be independent from the party that they're working from or interpreting for, and providing examples of how they maintain that independence. And they actually provide some scenarios about when that independence might be difficult to maintain.
Got it. I mean, that also potentially hints at like not having any family interpret for you.
Exactly. I think the standards do cover that scenario because they acknowledge that in some cases that might happen, but they provide some, really strict guidelines around when and if that would happen, and what needs to be taken into account in that situation. I think something that was really interesting from the standards is that they described the interpreter role in some detail, and they went into some detail about how mentally and physically taxing it is to be an interpreter. They were saying an interpreter must have an exceptional memory, needs to undertake complex mental analysis at the same time as committing facts to memory, taking notes, accessing their knowledge of the subject matter and terminology, and then rendering what they've heard in one language into another.
That's beautifully put.
It's nice to see it so well articulated.
We should have put that in the headline, the exceptional memory of interpreters.
Yeah.
These standards are out now. I think you attended a briefing session, right?
Yeah, there was a briefing session in person in Brisbane and online for worldwide attendees as well.
For overseas Australian in Madrid, joining remotely. All right. Quite the switcher to Amazon Transcribe. Just want to mention this briefly. We keep talking about all these big tech companies launching all kinds of language products. And I just wanted to highlight this one. We came across today being Wednesday, this week. Amazon launched Amazon Transcribe. Well, no, they launched this product a long time ago, but basically they posted a post called "Create Video Subtitles with Amazon Transcribe using this no-code workflow." Um, just wanted to highlight this because it's another so-called no-code product in kind of the core language space. Yes, it's not localization, it's not translation, but transcription output, of course, can be used to produce multilingual subtitles as well eventually. So Amazon going, or AWS rather, kind of their web AI, whatever heavy arm, right? I mean, mostly web hosting software, etc. But uh, launching or highlighting another no-code way of using one of their many language products is interesting. In a sense, they're aiming it at a non-technical crowd, so kind of going down market and really competing with some of these on the services side, of course, kind of the transcription providers, but also anybody who builds like um, a niche transcription software solution, right? So if you can get it straight in a no-code fashion from AWS, then maybe the incentive would be a lot smaller for you to go and look for another product. So it's interesting that AWS goes so far down market, so far towards the end consumer with a solution like that. And video subtitles being something that we cover regularly, I think it's interesting to follow this. So maybe we should get that person on the podcast. What's his name? Jason O'Malley. Used to be with Warner Media and some other media companies. Let's see. Maybe there's another product manager we can get on the pod as well. All right. So now we head over to the topic of interpreting with Kirsten Breck Baker from Genie. And welcome back, everyone, to Slater Pod. Today, we're really happy to have Kirsten Breck Baker join us today. So Kirsten is the co-founder and CEO of Genie, the on-demand healthcare interpreting platform. They recently raised some funding. We're going to talk about that too. So hi, Kirsten. Where does this podcast find you today? What country, what city?
Hi, Florian. I'm in Washington, D.C. Coming in from Washington, yes.
Calling in from Washington. So first, give us kind of the elevator pitch for Genie. Like, what does the platform do? Like, how large is the company now? Where are you based? Just kind of the company in a nutshell.
Sure. Well, what the company does is Genie is a mobile platform for interpreting that connects you to a live interpreter on any device pretty much you already own for on-demand access to language and cultural assistance. So you simply open an app or a URL on your computer, if you will, but an app on your tablet or your phone, and you select a language that you need help with. You decide whether you want a video or an audio call. In about 30 seconds, you have a live interpreter on screen to help you. Our average response time right now is about 15 seconds. But we're pretty proud to be the kind of first real true shared workforce model in this space, literally accessing over 11,000 interpreters all over the world in over 150 countries who we connect directly online to people who need that language and cultural assistance at the tap of a button.
Got it. And so mobile, it's really mobile first, right? So that you mentioned the link and and kind of on a desktop, but that's more of a secondary kind of mode.
Well, what we're seeing is that all of these modes are still necessary. So whether you're using a smartphone or a tablet, or whether you're still on a computer or even a landline, we integrate with you. What we do see is kind of the most revolutionary part of that, and I think the device that most people are kind of gravitating to so quickly is the smartphone, because as we know traditionally in this space, most interpreting platforms have not worked on platforms like a smartphone where you can have the interpreter right on video, not just audio, on demand at the tap of a button. It hasn't really worked like that. So that's become kind of unique here. And especially when you're looking in medical, of all places, and people are needing to kind of, doctor needs to go from surgery to a patient room to an assisted living facility to a clinic. All of a sudden, the mobile capability of the interpreter going wherever you go becomes really helpful.
Kirsten, what got you into this space? Like you're not originally, as far as I understand, from the language industry, from the translation or interpreting side. So tell us a bit more about your background and how you came across this opportunity.
Well, I mean, I would first say that I am the daughter of two linguists. So I grew up, with language and the love and appreciation for language in my DNA. My father was a professor of Slavic linguistics actually at Harvard University, and my mother was a German professor, her entire career. And they would take us on trips, and we would travel around the world. And it was pretty clear at a very early age what the ability to communicate with other people in their language and to understand and respect their culture, what that did for building relationships. So huge appreciation there. And they put me into a French immersion school in elementary school so that I started, pretty much my education learning in two different languages. And it was quite a treat to, I entered that school in sixth grade, not first grade. So I was the only one really in my class who didn't already speak French, and you got detention if you spoke English. So I learned very quickly.
So I made some bold assumptions, you not having a background in the space you actually do, more than most, I would assume, here with that family history.
I've been very fortunate to, be able to kind of explore that overseas and spend time studying abroad, but also in my early career coming out of college, working in international education. So I was really responsible for what were language and education exchange programs. So we were helping students, teachers, research scholars from the U.S. to go abroad to learn and study other languages and study other things in other languages, as well as bringing people from all over the world to the United States.
Then tell me more about the origin story of Genie. So how did that kind of translate into the idea of starting what your kind of the core Genie business model? How did you come up with the idea? What were some of the milestones kind of from initial kind of, hey, this is a great idea to where you're now?
Well, this was actually born out of my last company. So my last company, we were matching employers to candidates who had global competencies, we would say. So they would speak other languages, but they were sort of crossed with domain experience. So we needed to help a company staff up an entire marketing department, in China, or we needed to find Pashto speaking chemical engineers, and we were doing a lot of work there. And I was traveling abroad actually in Japan, and I was going to a meeting, and very pathetically, my Japanese is not very good. Neither is my kanji, and so I was in the taxi, and I was, the taxi cab driver and I were struggling to understand where I was going. We had to go back to the hotel. We got some assistance, and when he dropped me at the corner, uh, where I got out and I saw all of these, like, 500 different signs in kanji on a corner in Tokyo, and I was trying to understand which restaurant was the one I was going to. And I was like, wow, I could be accessing all of these different candidates right now who are already in my database. If they could only see me right now, know what I was doing, one of my Japanese English speakers, could be of assistance. And on the way back from that trip, I did a stopover in Berlin where my parents were. Again, my mother being a German speaker, I had her on my hip for 2 days, and I didn't have to order my food by picture or number. And I had everything I needed. And I said, well, if we only had, somebody, a live person whenever we needed them to understand our language and our culture, but the language and the culture where we were, how much more, business could we do? How many more relationships could we build? How much more fun could we have?
So basically, it was kind of a travel related original idea.
Yeah, I would say that, when we first launched our, MVP, our minimal viable product, that was in 2019, and there were 320 million Mandarin speaking travelers at the time. So travel and tourism was one of the first spaces that came looking for us. And because we're a system where, it's just as easy for a consumer to set up their account on this device as it is for, a business, in just a few minutes, you're a consumer, you're traveling, you put in a credit card and you can be using Genie and getting access to your interpreter. And so at that moment, yeah, there was a lot of need for travel tourism. In fact, we had an agreement with the Japanese Tourism Bureau to provide interpreting at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which sadly didn't happen. But when COVID came along, we decided to make a very big pivot into healthcare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is a huge market, of course, in the US. So I think people underestimate people in Europe tend to underestimate just the size of the US healthcare industry and like just how also in a sense how not consolidated, but like how easy it is to scale across the US healthcare industry as opposed to like those like 25 countries in the EU which all like use very different standards and metrics and everything. So talk to me Talk to me a bit about that pivot, and then how you kind of evolved from that original idea to what you're doing now, and the kind of the clients you have now, and the types of services you provide.
Well, we always figured we'd be getting into medical interpreting, but just because, as you say, it's so fundamental and it's so important, we just didn't know we'd be doing it so quickly. And part of that was it's one of the most competitive spaces in our industry, and so we see a lot of the companies in interpreting companies that is really kind of vying for the space in the medical industry, and there's and we were a little surprised when we made the pivot at how much our value proposition still resonated with a market that was already being so served. So ultimately, we figured, oh, well, we'll go into markets that may be less served. We have a perfect value proposition for what we said at the time was the SMB space, the small medium business space. We're super fast to set up, whether you're an individual or a business. It takes minutes. It doesn't take long sales cycles in, a whole bunch of different steps to get there. You don't have to buy new equipment or install things. You download an app, type in a URL, and it's really easy to use. I mean, you make two choices, tap a button, and the person's on screen without call centers, without operators. And we're super affordable because we work directly with our interpreters. We're at the lowest end of the pricing point in the market. So when we went into healthcare, it was actually quite a pleasant surprise to find that we were really resonating in the healthcare market too, as I said, which already had so many options. So we kind of went in the SMB route into that kind of customer pyramid where we're working with a lot of doctors' offices and clinics. And we've just been kind of pulled up that pyramid very quickly into larger hospitals and healthcare systems now because they're looking for a solution that, right now, most hospitals have one solution for OPI, one solution over the phone interpreting, one solution for video remote interpreting, one solution for in person, maybe another solution for ASL, and very little with mobile. And what we, said was, well, other than in person, we can kind of do all of that. And providing that mobile point of access to them, again, where you have caregivers who can now take the interpreter wherever they went, really resonated. The other piece that I think we were surprised to see resonate so much is the rare and indigenous languages that we provide. And we've been able to spin those up, given our flexible workforce model, very quickly, and respond to client needs, where they need like very kind of lesser diffuse languages.
You're also offering ASL, right?
Correct.
Tell me a bit about the sourcing there. So, those hard to source indigenous languages, the ASL, how is it different to source these language versus maybe Chinese, Vietnamese, Spanish, kind of the more, more common languages?
Yeah, I think I'll sort of start at the end of the story and go backwards, but we're super fortunate at this point to find that the greatest source of referrals for us, or the greatest sourcing we have right now, are referrals from our other linguists. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's because we are paying at the highest end of the market, compensating, and we have a flexible workforce model that doesn't mandate interpreters to basically sign up to an 8-hour scheduled day for a year or 6 months without an ability to change that. You toggle on and off whenever you want. You're just obligated to make sure that you can stay on for an hour to take that call. And then we just have very sophisticated coverage boards and sophisticated technology that monitor all of that to make sure that we're never missing anything. And as supply and demand shifts over time, we can go out to the market and get more people online. So we've solved a lot of those other problems, I think, with technology. But with sourcing American Sign Language interpreters and sourcing rare and indigenous, it's been very important to us to take a grassroots level and to use other interpreters in those spaces to source for us. And part of that is telling other interpreters the experience they have. We find that in one of the classic rumors that you hear about this industry is that it hasn't necessarily valued interpreters, and they don't necessarily feel very valued. And we're taking an approach, sort of very anti-gig economy model, which is interpreters are our assets. They are the heart and soul of our company. We want them to feel like when they come to Genie, they are in like the most exclusive, community. They're taken care of. They're cared for. We grow their education, their skill sets. And I think that, the classic model with, the industry has always been it's like a balloon. You're either squeezing the customer, by charging them more, you're squeezing the interpreter by charging them less. And, one of the things we'll say to a healthcare client is, be very careful when you get these low prices, because for people to charge you such low prices in VRI or OPI, it probably means that they're paying their interpreters really poorly. And we just are taking a very different model. And part of that is cutting out the middleman, going direct to interpreters, which allow us to pay only them and not having to pay two people in the process. But that gig economy model, being in 150 countries, we have people on the ground. So when we needed to source Mayan and Guatemalan dialects, let alone others, we were able to do that pretty quickly.
Got it. I think your background with your previous role in like staffing kind of maybe that influenced the mindset that the sourcing is kind of at the heart of it. I'm sensing a little bit here, right?
I love that, and I think on some level that's right. Like when you start with the appreciation for what the asset is, when you start for the appreciation that it's not, a bunch of smart people sitting in offices and running companies just really well. And I'm not saying that's how competitors feel, but when you start from the realization that it's all about these amazing multilinguals, most of the world is multilingual. We don't always kind of, appreciate that in the United States, but most of the world is multilingual. When you start with kind of, all of these incredible people with so much talent who are willing to kind of give their time to help other people solve problems through languages, you just want to be, pay a lot of respect to that. It's really an honor.
Yeah, and it's very hard to kind of the chicken egg, right? The supply and demand and making sure that people are available at the time they need to be, etc. That's such a complex part of this, yeah, the business you're in. So
Marketplaces are complex.
they're very
Yeah.
complex, especially in this where it's time critical to get the person on I mean on Odesk or Upwork rather now. I mean like you can wait for the web developer to respond to you in 2 or 3 hours, but in your business, like person needs to be online immediately.
That's right, especially in medical settings. Yep.
When you talk to the investors, you recently closed a $9.3 million kind of was it a Series A round? When you spoke to the people at Transformation Capital, like did they need to what part of the business did they need to understand in particular? I guess they got the marketplace model and maybe got the tech. Like or correct me if I'm wrong, but which was the hardest part to explain to them?
It's interesting. I think one of the reasons we ended up working and partnering with Transformation Capital in the end, relative to some of the other firms we were, speaking to at the time, was because they actually understood so much about the problem, not just the technology and not just, the as you say, kind of like, the pain point in healthcare was real to them. One of the partners there was a physician. He was a resident, or he is a physician, I should say, but he was a resident at Mass General Brigham in Cambridge, and he had the experience of being rounding or serving patients at 2 in the morning, and needing to call his wife, who's a Spanish speaker, in order to be able to speak to a patient. And so there was a very kind of visceral connection, to the problem. And I think their insight into healthcare and the fact that they've gone very deep into healthcare has also prompted them to see a lot of the problems in a much less superficial way. Like they've really kind of gone into the core to say, like, what's causing so much of the inequity, what's causing so much of the lack of kind of equal access, to quality healthcare, and they want to solve for that problem. And as we know, there are lots of kind of fundamental, deep-rooted problems contributing to health equity and patient literacy, but language is one of the things you can solve for today at the tap of a button.
Are they actively supporting or they're taking a bit of more of a backseat, kind of more passive investor approach?
They're very active, very active. I think that I'm in communication with members of their team, multiple times a week. So yeah, yeah, they've been fantastic. And it's not, yes, they're doing the wonderful job as an investor of making introductions and helping to open doors again, especially because they know healthcare so well. But I think they have a fundamental belief that putting us in front of portfolio companies that they have or partners that they know is actually helping, those companies. And so I think that it's an easy match for them to make. But they also bring, other expertise around organizational structuring and compensation, and they've got just a rich background and team that understands a lot of different components that help us.
So now that you raised the funds, what are your like top one, two, three priorities going forward deploying the money?
Yeah, Florian, it's hiring for sure. We are hiring staff across pretty much every, element of the business. We've, tripled the size of our engineering team, and we're hiring for our product team, and, certainly, our client development and success, all of that. But technology in innovation is a big part of that. We're very focused. With Genie, we've taken technology very serious from the beginning. Obviously, we built something that we think is rather elegant. It's certainly innovative in the sense that we've been able to use technology, again, mobile, in a way that some of the older companies that didn't have access to that technology when they first were created, that they weren't able to. But we see the integration with other platforms as one of the fundamental directions that the industry is going to go in. So it's very important that we're built to integrate. And it's not kind of, a multi-million dollar, venture for us to kind of integrate with, a telehealth system or an electronic medical record, system. We were actually built to do it. So it's a much simpler system. We're actually working with Zoom right now, where we will be launching our in-app function for Zoom, which is not sort of the typical backend calendar plugin, which some of our competitors have, but it's an in-app embedded in product function where we'll be on a call like this. You'll have the home screen on the side of the Zoom app as soon as you pull up, your Genie app on the side of the phone. And same thing, you pick the language, you pick an audio or video call. That person enters your Zoom call right at the time that you're having the call, or you can schedule it in advance. So really kind of exploring those integrations with other platforms is going to be a big part of where we're spending those funds.
That's a big win, getting Zoom and getting a deep integration with them already at this stage, right?
We saw a huge amount of potential. I mean, just given the amount of, activity obviously they're doing, especially during, COVID, but still,
It's not going away.
that's not going away. I mean, it's that genie's never going back in the bottle, as we like to joke. But their commitment to telehealth, Zoom for healthcare, their commitment for telehealth is just it's very aggressive, and they really mean it. And this gives them the ability now to basically be able to kind of commit to multilingual telehealth. And now you're really serving all patients.
Are the other platforms like Teams, Google Meet, what have you, are those important platforms as well, or is it primarily about Zoom in healthcare?
No, no, I mean, certainly, any platform where people are seeking, medical assistance from others, but let alone, non-medical. I mean, they just need to have conversations. We need to kind of converse with our business partners overseas or family members. I mean, all of this is really important. And Genie we've had on for a while the ability for our clients, our enterprise clients, on their dashboard, when they go to schedule a call in advance, they can actually copy and paste a link from any upcoming third party call that they're going to have, whether it's Teams, whether it's Meet, doesn't matter. And if they cut and paste that URL into that scheduled call on our platform, our interpreters will join that call at the scheduled date and time. So no, we think all of all these platforms are doing something fantastic, and we're again built for integration with all of them if it's possible.
When you talked about the interpreters dialing in, they're usually or they're always now dialing in from a kind of a location of their choosing. You don't run like a hub somewhere or like, and you're not planning to, because I think in the past, people or companies have run like big interpreting hubs where maybe like 500 Spanish interpreters would be there. This is not something that's on your roadmap. Like it's fully remote. They choose where they sit.
That's correct. And we think that this speaks to not just sort of the world trend of people being more remote now, working remote, serving remote. But we also think it sort of, speaks to the kind of philosophy again of what we're trying to do, which is to take anybody in the world and connect them to anybody in any part of the world at any time that they need assistance. And if you're not in a hub and you're at home, you have more flexibility of when you can be online, as long as, again, you've been very qualified by our very rigorous qualifying process. Your backgrounds are all professional. But we think that there's a big advantage, for interpreters in that, and that flexibility is attractive to them. We also see that we're not then at risk for, things that can happen in the world. COVID hits, and all of a sudden being in a call center is not, kind of a safe place to be anymore. And that can be problematic. The other issue with hubs versus kind of more of a distributed model is, whenever you have a hub of any sort, you're still being, kind of funneled into this process of an operator before an interpreter. There's still a funneling, channeling process. And no matter how fast you make that, that costs you time as the client. And for us, back to your point about getting, answers in healthcare quickly, direct to the interpreter saves us an enormous amount of time.
Talk to me about some of the technical challenges, maybe on the mobile side and the latency. Is that an issue? You feel it's a solved issue, or like unstable connection? Just basic things. Are these solved, or you kind of see them on a daily basis?
It's interesting. We see mobile, quite the opposite, as sort of huge opportunity. We really see it as the blazing, new opportunity, and if not a bit revolutionary in this space again, so that people can take the interpreter with you wherever you go. Are there connectivity issues to be dealt with? For sure. And we're very, fortunate that, there are very large companies working on those problems kind of every day, in order to solve them and make them better. And hotspot technology, there are a lot of ways in which that's being addressed right now.
Got it. And on your tech roadmap, maybe if you can give us a bit of an outlook there, next 2 to 3 years, what's, well, maybe 1 or 2 years. Let's take it a little shorter time frame there. What are some of the key things you're working on right now?
To the point of integration again, and platform integration, we've loved this process with Zoom, and we're really looking to do more very kind of serious, deliberate, intentional partnerships there. So we're talking to a couple of EMR, EHR partners now, electronic health record, electronic medical record partners, about integrations with them, where we can not only help them to serve, a greater population of patients with language assistance. We can, help them to, mitigate the risk of their healthcare providers with language assistance, but we can also help them with things like billing and reimbursement. And we've got lots of kind of different, process integration ideas there that we're super excited with. So part of the innovation is not, just kind of looking internal, which is important, and looking at our own processes, which we will always do, but it's actually looking at the customer's process, not just their language need, and understanding how do we just make it easier for the customer to experience this. So we're super focused on, user experience, user interface, but for clients, but our other customer are our interpreters, our linguists, and it's important that we give them the best process as well. So we're going to be making huge improvements on, what their interface looks like, and their dashboard, and their ability to work with us. Again, making them feel like they're very special, which they are, and they belong to a community that believes in them.
For the interpreting industry as a whole, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, like where do you see this going? How do you see the market growing or not? What are the good pockets of growth maybe for you? I guess you're focusing mostly on the US maybe for the next couple of years, or just what's your general outlook for the industry there?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say for interpreting is, it's growing. It's going to keep growing, and it's going to grow, I think, faster than it's been growing. I mean, we've been, at a point where we've been able to say 1 in 5 people in the United States, don't have speak comfortable English at home. But for all the kind of obvious reasons and migrant trends in the world right now, that number is going up faster in the United States than it's ever been before. But it's also going up faster in other countries than it's ever been before. And migrant patterns, in addition to just kind of increased trade, increased global communication, are going to make it more and more necessary that we're all communicating with people who speak other languages and are coming from other cultures. So just, growing in general, which we think is huge. But a couple of the other, patterns that I see in interpreting is really, one is a migration from over the phone interpreting to more video interpreting. I think one industry after another, especially healthcare, is just recognizing how much more effective it is when we can look at each other like we're doing right now, Florian, and you can see if I'm saying yes or yes, how I'm feeling about it. You can see in my eyes if I've understood your question, let alone if I'm, kind of answering confidently. There's so much to that that, visual and the nuance that gets conveyed in that that's so fundamental. And so many healthcare clients are contacting us because they've been using over the phone and now they really see a huge value in migrating to video, maybe with the exception of call center. But even in those cases, they really want eyes on the people that they're communicating with, and there is a trust. We do a lot of work at the border, in immigration and refugee support in clinics and shelters, and there's also a real big trust built with the person that you're communicating with if they're able to see someone who speaks their language, someone who understands their culture online while they're having another conversation, right? It really helps to diffuse. So I think video is a big pattern, and then just more virtual. We are seeing, especially, COVID taught us that, virtual interpreting, it works. It can be very effective. And I think that there are plenty of cases where, we don't want to substitute in-person interpreting. But what's been really interesting is the surveys that they've done with patients and families where predominantly with probably the exception of the deaf community, patients feel like it's less intrusive, it's less invasive to have a virtual interpreter, than it is to have somebody right there. You're robing, you're disrobing, you're not sure if you're local, if you'll run into your interpreter at the grocery store. I mean, there have been many concerns conveyed by people where they've said that having, kind of virtual interpreting is comfortable for them, especially in a medical setting. But we certainly see, in kind of, cases, especially surgery, and where there's such a fast-paced need for somebody there to have an in-person interpreter, is so fundamental, I think, to the process as well. But virtual care is definitely, just like virtual telehealth is here to stay. The virtual contribution of interpreting in that platform and in that industry is here to stay as well.
That's a very, very interesting point that you raised now with like people feeling that sometimes it's actually a lot more convenient to have like, yeah, somebody on a mobile or somebody on an iPad there as opposed to somebody actually being physically in the room. I never really thought about that.
We were surprised too, and there are, a number of different kind of hospitals doing studies on that. But I think a lot of it was, really around, just having the moments where you can just stop, right? You can take someone off camera, you control that situation more yourself as the patient or the caregiver, and I think that made a difference.
Well, that was super interesting. Kirsten, thank you so much for taking the time today and good luck with Genie in the future.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you so much for you for and Slater for having us. We really appreciate it. You're doing such great work. Our industry is grateful.
Thank you.